On August 27th, 2021, 22-year-old Gabby Petito was murdered while on a cross-country trip with her fiance, Brian Laundrie. Her disappearance gripped the nation, sparking a massive search effort that ended in tragedy when her body was discovered in Grand Teton National Park. Shortly after, Brian Laundrie went missing, and weeks later, his remains were found in Florida's Carlton Reserve. Alongside his body, authorities recovered a notebook containing what appeared to be his final confession. But was it truly a confession, or was it something else? My name is Justin Atherton. I'm a former SWAT officer and law enforcement investigator, now a leadership and communication expert, and in my TEDx talk, The Suspect Within, I introduced the power of content analysis, a technique used to break down language, uncover deception, and reveal the truth behind words. Today, I'm applying that same method to Brian Laundrie's so-called confession by analyzing his words, sentence structure, and the way he frames events. We'll uncover what he might be really saying and what he might be trying to hide. So let's break it down. I got this printout of the confession, his 8-page journal that was found beside his body from another YouTube video where some reporters broke this down. So I'm going to put that link down below. Well, let's get into it. I'm going to read through the confession / suicide note that he left, and I'm going to go through the different pieces of what I find interesting and what's missing and how this is structured. So here he starts off. Gabby, I wish I was right at your side. I wish I could be talking to you right now. I'd be going through every morning we made, getting even more excited for this future. But we lost our future. I can't live without you. I can't be without you. I've lost every day we could have spent together, every holiday. I'll never get to play with cats with you, never go hiking with TJ. I loved you more than anything. I can't bear to look at our photos to recall great times because it's why I cannot go on. When I close my eyes, I will think of lounging on the roof of the van, falling asleep to the side of unintelligible at the Crystal Geyser. I will always love you. If you were reading Gab's journal, looking at photos of her life together, flipping through old cards, you wouldn't want to live a day without her. Knowing that every day you'll wake up without her, you wouldn't want to wake up. I'm sorry to everyone this will affect. Gabby was the love of my life, but I unintelligible by many. I'm so very sorry to her family because I love them. I'd consider her younger siblings my best of friends. I am sorry to my family. This is a shock to you as well, a terrible grief. They loved her so much, if not more than me, a new daughter to my mother, an aunt to my nephews. Please do not make this harder for them. So, starting off here, in confessions or statements, the first thing we look for is the breakdown on how much are they talking before we get to the incident. Now, I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt because not only is this a confession, it's also a suicide note. But if we broke it down, I would say that this first part here, we haven't even got to the incident yet, and it's looking like it's at least 30% of the statement. So we haven't even gotten to what's taken place, but I'll give him the benefit of the doubt because it is also considered a suicide note. This next part is where we really get into the incident. This occurred as an unexpected tragedy. So already I've got a problem with this. This occurred. What occurred? He doesn't even want to say it. He's using distancing language, just saying this occurred, not her death or her murder. So this occurred as an unexpected tragedy. Pushing back to our car, trying to cross the streams of a creek before it got too dark to see, too cold. Okay, lots of problems here. Pushing back to our car. What does that mean? Were we pushing back to the car? Was I pushing back to the car? The lack of a proper pronoun, I, we, they, is an issue. The other issue is he is talking in the present tense. So this indicates fabrication. Because when we talk about an incident in the past tense, it should read something along, we pushed back to the car, we tried to cross the streams of the creek before it got too dark to see. But he's saying, pushing back to our car, trying to cross the streams of a creek before it got too dark to see, too cold. Next part. I hear a splash and a scream. Again in present tense. I hear, not I heard. I hear a splash and a scream. I could barely see. I couldn't find her for a moment. Shouted her name. Again, he left out I. I shouted her name. He's not owning this. Is it because it's fabricated, or it's because he doesn't want to own it? So it could be a couple issues here. I found her breathing heavily, gasping and unintelligible. Was freezing cold also unintelligible? I was freezing cold also. So he's not owning these statements. When someone takes ownership of an action, I was cold also. I was freezing cold. So a lot of leaving out the pronouns here. Now this next part, it's almost laughable the way it skips around. So again, I found her breathing, gasping, unintelligible, was freezing cold. So presumably she fell in the creek that they were attempting to cross. The blazing hot national parks in Utah. Okay. The temperature had dropped to freezing and she was soaking wet. Got it. It was cold. She was freezing. How is this relevant? He's trying to justify what's coming next. I carried her as far as I could down the stream towards the car, stumbling, exhausted, in shock. Again, stumbling, present tense. Is he fabricating this? And it becomes a little hard to follow here. So when my unintelligible and no, I couldn't safely carry her, I started a fire and spooned her as close to the heat. Okay. So she got wet. He's like, hey, let's start a fire. She was so thin, had already been freezing too long. She had already been freezing. I had already been freezing. Again, he's not taking ownership of these statements. I couldn't, at the time, realize that I should have started a fire first, but I wanted her out of the cold back to the car. From where I started the fire, I had no idea how far the car might be. Only knew it was across the creek. Okay. So they're out on a hike. They're going back towards the car. Presumably, from this part so far, they have entered the creek. She falls into the creek. He gets her out of the creek, but doesn't Again, this is very hard to follow because it seems like he's saying he carried her for a while, but because he carried her for so long before starting a fire. So he made a decision, I'm going to carry her until I couldn't anymore, and then I'm going to stop and start a fire. Okay? But then he says that he knew that the car was across the creek. So they entered the creek, she fell. He presumably brought her back out of the creek, didn't cross with her, brought her out, carried her somewhere, not towards the car, but somewhere on this side of the creek for an extended amount of time before he started a fire, and then spooned her close to the heat. Okay. Let's move on to the next paragraph. So this is the point. So he pulls her out, carries her for a while, starts a fire, spoons next to her. Listen to this next paragraph. When I pulled Gabby out of the water, now we've gone into the past. The story isn't chronological. He's going back to justify why he did or didn't do something. When I pulled Gabby out of the water, she couldn't tell me what hurt. Hang on to that statement for a moment. She couldn't tell me what hurt. She had a small bruise on her forehead that eventually got larger. Okay? Her feet hurt, her wrist hurt, but she was freezing, shaking violently. Okay, she couldn't tell you what hurt, or her feet hurt and her wrist hurt. Which one is it? Shaking violently. That one sticks out to me because is it because of the freezing or is it because of something else that she's shaking violently? While carrying her, again, now we're going back to present tense, so this is fabrication. While carrying her, she continually made sounds of pain. What sounds of pain? Laying next to her, so now we're back into the future where he's spooning her. So he went back into the past for a little bit to try to explain some things away, and now he's like, okay, well now we're back by the fire, and I'm spooning next to her. Laying next to her, she said little, lapsing between violent shakes, gasping in pain, begging for an end to her pain. Okay? She would fall asleep. The phrasing, it's off. She would fall asleep, and I would shake her awake, fearing she shouldn't close her eyes if she had a concussion. She would wake in pain, start her whole painful cycle again, furious that I was the one waking her. She wouldn't let me try to cross the creek, thought like me that the fire would go out in her sleep and she'd freeze. Okay. Clearly they're having a conversation during this process. Back towards the beginning or the middle of this paragraph, he says, laying next to her, she said little. Well, clearly they had enough of a conversation to where he's like, hey, I'm going to go try to get to the car. I'm going to leave you here and figure out where the car's at. And she's like, no, the fire's going to go out. So was she talking a little bit or was she not talking a little bit? He contradicts himself multiple times throughout this statement. Thought like me. Who did? She thought like me? Again, there's no ownership to some of these statements that he's making here. Thought like me that the fire would go out in her sleep and she'd freeze. Okay. Next paragraph, next page, I guess. I don't know what the extent of Gabby's injuries. Well, you just told us in the previous paragraph that she had a small bruise on her forehead that eventually got larger. Her feet hurt, her wrist hurt, she was freezing and shaking violently. Now we're going and saying, I don't know what the extent of Gabby's injuries. Okay, maybe he's saying how bad, but if she's crying in pain and telling him that she wants an end to her pain, probably significant. I don't know what the extent of Gabby's injuries, only that she was in extreme pain. I ended her life. Now, that is a rare statement. But there's also some vagueness to it, right? I ended her life. Well, how did you end her life? How did you make that decision, and what did you do to end her life? The little bit I do know about this case is that the medical examiner said that she was strangled to death, which isn't something that happens on accident. That is a purposeful act that takes time to conduct. Okay. I ended her life. I thought it was merciful. So, right after his confession, he's justifying why he did what he did. I thought it was merciful. Thought it was what she wanted. Again, he's not taking ownership of that. Thought, not I thought. But I see now all the mistakes I made. I bet. I panicked. I was in shock. You were in shock before or after you murdered her? My guess is after. But from the moment I decided, took away her pain, I knew I couldn't go on without her. What a weird sentence, or multiple run-on sentence. But from the moment I decided, comma, took away her pain. He can't even articulate it correctly. Did you decide it, or were you panicked and in shock? Sounds like you made a decision. Took away her pain. How did you take away her pain? I knew I couldn't go on without her. That's about where most of the deception stops. The end of this, I rushed home to spend my time I had left with my family. I wanted to drive north and let James or TJ kill me. Apparently that's her family. But I wouldn't want them to spend time in jail over my mistake, even though I'm sure they would have liked to. I'm ending my life not because of fear of punishment, but rather because I can't stand to live another day without her. So he's not taking complete ownership of this crime, this heinous crime of murdering her. He is claiming to be the man that can't live without his lost love. Poor guy. I've lost our whole future together. Well, she also lost her future because of you. Every moment we could have shared. I'm sorry for everyone's loss. Please do not make life harder for my family. They lost a son and a daughter, the most beautiful girl in the world. Gabby, I'm sorry. I have killed myself by this creek in the hopes that animals may tear me apart, that it may make some of her family happy. Please pick up all my things. Gabby hated people who litter. Okay. Very interesting way to end your suicide note / confession. So, again, going back over some of these ideas here with the statement. So when we look at these statements, we look at pronoun usage and psychological distancing. Some of the statements where he says at the beginning, he's talking about how I wish I was right by your side. He's directly addressing what's going on, but he's trying to convey this sincere regret that he has over what he did. But he delays the whole aspect of his confession and what he did, and never really explains what he did or why he chose to do that. There's a lot of minimization, justification. I thought it was merciful, thought it was what she wanted. I see now all the mistakes I made. You know, he frames his homicide as an accident, downplaying his intent. She was freezing, shaking violently, begging for an end to her pain. Again, trying to justify the act by painting this hopeless scenario, implying that he was putting her out of her misery. You know, this type of language attempts to refrain his actions as compassionate rather than violent. And this is a common strategy in deceptive statements. The timeline is off. The vague language, you know, pushing back to our car, trying to cross the streams. It switches from past tense to present tense. I hear a splash. All of this indicates fabrication. I carried her as far as I could down the stream towards the car, stumbling, exhausted, in shock. He mentions his exhaustion and struggles, not hers, shifting focus away from her suffering. Oh, I was suffering too. I was exhausted. I couldn't carry her anymore. No clear moment of death is described. Instead, he focuses on carrying, warming her, and comforting her. He tries to paint himself as the good guy here. I was trying to do all the right things. Incomplete information or omissions. I don't know the extent of Gabby's injuries, only that she was in extreme pain. Well, okay. Why are you avoiding the specificity of it? And then from the moment I decided took away her pain, I knew I couldn't go on without her. Well, what was the moment? He never explicitly states how he killed her, although we know he strangled her to death. I pulled Gabby out of the water. She couldn't tell me what hurt. Well, if she couldn't tell you what hurt, then why do you list multiple injuries? Again, he's omitting the cause of her death, the guilt, the self-punishment language. I wanted to drive north and let James and TJ kill me. He's projecting, this guilt. I've killed myself by the creek in the hopes that some animals may tear me apart. Okay. Some type of self-inflicted punishment. But again, he's shifting the focus away from Gabby and her family. It's more of a, focusing on them wanting revenge against him, which I would assume that they did. The blame is externalized. He frames his death as more of like an atonement rather than accepting this full accountability for the murder that he committed. Wow. I don't know much about this case. This was brought to my attention as something to analyze, and clearly, although he admits to killing her, there's a lot of issues with his statement. And content analysis is, I think it's a secret weapon in detecting deception. Most people talk about the 93% that's focused on body language and pitch and tone of your voice. And I've trained on all of these topics and I believe in all of them, but that missing 7%, the actual words that we use, and this is something that can be used in a moment. And as you can see, we can go after the fact over statements that are written, but the 7% is the key to detecting deception. And if you have some suggestions on some other cases I should look at, drop it in the comments and I'll create a video about it. Make sure it's one that has some type of statement, whether it's a audio statement or a written statement that can be analyzed, and we'll see what we can get into at that point. Thank you for watching. If you found this insightful, subscribe, follow for more content. And again, give me some suggestions on the next case to look into, and we'll pick apart another statement.